All right, it is 4:01. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order.
Generally.
All right, Greg Richards has agreed to ask the invocation.
Bow your heads with me. Lord, thank you for another beautiful day in the hill country. We just ask for your blessing on our time together here, that you'd give us wisdom to address the business that's before us. Lord, I ask that you'd bless the citizens of this community and just prosper us so that we can continue to give glory to you. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 All right, item number 1 on the agenda is the Visitors Citizens Forum. Any citizen with business not scheduled on the agenda may speak to the Economic Improvement Corporation. No deliberation or action can be taken on these items because the Open Meetings Act requires an item be posted on an agenda 72 hours before the meeting. Visitors are asked to limit their presentation to 3 minutes. Any visitors want to speak? All right, I see none. We'll move on to item number 2, which is approval of the minutes from the June 17th, 2019 EIC meeting. I'm looking for
I'll make a motion to accept the
approve.
minutes.
We have a motion?
Second.
And a second. Any discussion or changes? I'm hearing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes, raise your right hand. And that is approved unanimously. Moving on to item number 3. 3A, well, it's the only item in number 3, so it's item number 3. The projects update. EH?
I'm sure I got the right page there. Okay, we'll go through these pretty quickly. As you can see, you've got a long list of projects here. I was looking back at this time last year. We had about 3 projects going, so it's been a very active EIC over this last year. Lots of good work out there catalyzing economic development in the community. River Trail Extension, we've got that out for bid right now. Those bids will be received tomorrow, and so we're hoping for good sharp pencils, and we'll be able to report back next month on what direction we're going with that. But hopefully we've got bids within our budget amount, and we can continue to progress that project. Tennis center improvements, as we reported to you last time, we've had some rain weather delays. Obviously that project is very exposed externally, a lot of outdoor work, but we're continuing to move it forward. We're still hoping to be open in that early spring, late winter time frame, assuming we don't have rain all the way through the remainder of 2019. Aquatics feasibility study, staff had a huddle up with the contractor, the consultant last week, and we are, as we told you before, finalizing a phasing plan that would help us look at ways that we could continue to progress towards accomplishing the stakeholder input that we received throughout that process. So we'll anticipate bringing those back to you all and the city council and the public here in the near future. Legion Lift Station is going great. We're still on track to have that project wrapped up by really the first quarter of 2020. So we're making great progress on that. Reuse distribution lines, as we mentioned, we had a very successful grant award with that disaster recovery funds that we'll be able to leverage and hopefully put that equipment up onto the Loop 534 bridge. So moving out forward. Econo Lodge, Hobby Lobby, if you haven't driven by there lately, that tilt wall construction, those tilt walls have been poured. And so you'll see some vertical movement here very soon. A little bit of a weather delay, but they are still anticipating hopefully being open right around the end of September, beginning of October timeframe. So a lot of work to be done here over the next few months, but they're moving very quickly. Thompson Spur 98 infrastructure extension. That project, we're excited to say, has been let by the private developer, and you may have seen work if you passed through there. They have been digging water line, trenching first and laying pipe out there on water lines. That'll be the first phase of that, and then they'll continue on with wastewater lines. So making good progress, and we're glad that they have signed that contract and met that first checkbox as far as their performance indicators to this group. Olympic Drive Extension, we're in the process of going through the construction document generation. We think we'll have that wrapped up in the next 2 to 3 months. Have a project that hopefully should be able to be let September, October timeframe once we get it out on the street and get bids. Downtown Streetscape, also another one that we are in the process of doing construction documents for right now. Similar time frame to Olympic Drive extension. We think we'll be hopefully letting a project in the early fall timeframe. So lots of good work out there. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have for me.
All right, questions?
You sound busy.
We're staying busy.
I've got one question, EA.
Yes,
With
sir.
the water development grant, those
Yes.
reuse distribution lines will now be moved up onto the Loop 534 bridge?
That's the intent right now. That's where we're headed. Obviously, we haven't moved forward with a full design engineering contract, but we actually just met with TxDOT last week to get kind of their preliminary nod. As you may know, we have some infrastructure already up there, and so we'll be looking at doing some revamp and obviously some new piping up there. But we're hoping, given that we have infrastructure there now, that they'll continue to give us permission to add on to that here in the future. So
Did they kind of give the nod more or less as far as the blessing to move forward with that?
that's our hope. Yeah, we've got to get the final check off from the district engineer, but we've got the preliminary okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, EA. Moving on to item number 4. We're gonna kind of walk through this a little differently than maybe what it looks like on the agenda. We are gonna talk about our own budget, and then we'll discuss the KEDC budget, as you can see in item number 4B. And so those two, we're gonna approve our budget once we hear the KEDC's budget and move forward from there. So Amy Dozier's here to present to you our budget.
All right, very good. Okay, so turning your packet to the financial statement labeled cash flow forecast. So we've continued to tweak the financial statements a little bit presentation-wise to hopefully make them more clear, readable, understandable. A few things to note about this cash flow forecast and the subsequent statements. Rather than having two funds, we've had an operating fund and a project fund, and we do still actually account for things in that way. We're going to present it to the board at a consolidated level, because I think there's some confusion about this transfer from here to here, and as far as actually managing EIC goes, it's probably easier for you to just look at things on a consolidated basis instead of having to worry about transfers in and transfers out, that kind of thing. So this is a consolidated look, has both funds taken together. And last month we talked about specifically adding this cash flow forecast and the importance of the cash flow forecast when you're looking at projects and different asks and knowing how much money does EIC actually have available at any given point in time. So if you'll look at the far left column labeled June 19 there, you can see that at the beginning of June, EIC started with a cash balance of that $3.5 million. Then during the month, revenue was received, sales tax and interest, totaling that $312,000. And then there was just basic expenses paid during the month of June. So the administrative fee and KEDC's quarterly payment. And then also EIC paid its monthly debt service amount as well. So total expenditures of $143,000, ending cash balance of $3.7 million. And you can see moving out that this cash flow forecast is done on a quarterly basis. So we've tried to make conservative estimates about which quarter different project costs will be paid. You'll see, like for example, the Thompson Drive Partners, the way that contract is written, there's different milestones construction-wise that they have to meet in order to have those payments released. So we're trying to estimate when those will happen. And we've tried to, be on the conservative side. If anything, these payments should be on the early side, but they may get pushed depending on how construction goes. But you can see that we're looking at ending the year, so ending the fiscal year, which is September 30th, with a $3.9 million cash balance. Then moving forward into fiscal year 2020, and that's on the right side of that line, there's revenues coming in, and then each quarter expenses going out for those administrative fees, for the debt service, and then our estimates on which quarter different project payments will be made. So you'll see that low balance there in the quarter ended March 2020 of the $1.381 million as the ending cash balance there. And by the end of the year, getting to $2.2 million as the ending cash balance. And of course, this, we don't know which projects are gonna come next year, so this, doesn't assume any new projects. This is just looking at the projects that are already signed right now. And you'll notice, the yellow, highlighting on some of these and this color coding throughout. So this is kind of just to help you, tick and tie between statements. So the yellow numbers here correspond to yellow numbers that you'll see on other statements as well. So moving to the second page, this is the draft budget. And so this is, exactly what we, talked about. Yes, sir.
Yeah, real quick, one question on the cash flow forecast, just because I'm new and may not know, but is it fair to say that in that next to last column in fiscal year 2020, do those payments fulfill all of the outstanding obligations that we have for now, so that if you look at that last column, July through September, if we projected that forward, there would not be any future installments of any of the current projects?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that completely pays off all of the currently signed project agreements. There are continuing debt service expenses, obviously, for the next 15 years or so. Those things continue out, but project-wise, that completes the payments for all.
The debt service has its own line.
Correct.
But the other question is, these other projects that we've just talked about, they're not listed here because there are not any numbers attached to those yet in terms of payments, like the pool.
Right,
That'd be correct.
that's
Correct.
right.
Yes.
It has no value yet and has no, we have no obligation to that yet because we've not reached anything, even though we've spent some money on that project.
Yeah, so this is forward-looking, and we're looking at project expenses for projects that we have signed agreements on. But we're hoping that this presentation format here, when you look at that ending cash balance line, that will help you when you're making a decision about, should we fund this additional project? And if we are gonna fund it, what should the timing of those payments look like?
So the reserves we've set aside for business or so forth that we've been setting aside, that no longer exists. That's already not
So
built in here.
Yeah, we've consolidated everything together, so.
We don't have to look at that,
and we-
no
correct,
set-asides to
right,
look at.
Right, yeah, and the set-asides, I think, were intentionally discussed during the budget process each year, but there wasn't a, separate bank account or separate general ledger account, that kind of thing for those. So, and right now, EIC has a lot of projects going on and a lot of expenses that will be going out. So there's no additional set-asides anywhere, no additional funds to
For
look at,
housing or
anything
anything,
like
there's
that.
no
Right,
set,
right.
there's no set-asides.
So it was theoretical.
Yeah,
In-
exactly,
at
but it
best.
kind of
So-
curtailed your thinking.
It did. So that, if you look at that far right column, we may say, out of that money, we want to spend it on projects of A, B, C, D, and it just was something for you to think about.
Yeah.
And then it turned into more.
It looked like an obligation,
It did get spent.
Yeah.
It got
It looked like an
confusing.
obligation.
It did look like an
It did.
obligation. And so we cleaned.
commitment.
Amy's done a great job of cleaning this up to
Much
where it's a
easier
little easier to
format.
read.
Thanks. Yeah, that's definitely the intent, and I appreciate y'all's feedback and the iterations that we've gone through. So please continue to, provide any suggestions or comments that you have. Looking at the second page of the draft budget, are y'all ready to move on to that page?
Sure.
Okay. So this is exactly the same as what we talked about last month, with the exception of one line item, and that's the KEDC line item. So last month, we had it in at $180,000 for fiscal year 2020. It's gone up to $250,000 based on what KEDC's request is. So that's why we're gonna wait to vote on the budget until after KEDC does their presentation, so you'll have time to ask any questions and decide, for sure what you want that number to be. So right now, it's in at their requested amount. And just to refresh your memory on that 2020 draft budget column, the sales tax line item there, we've tried to be conservative with our projection there. We've taken where we think we're gonna end 2019, and we're forecasting a 2.5% growth. We're gonna be, looks like close to 5% growth this year. So we feel like the 2.5 is conservative. We also have put a specific amount into for the regional retail that we have opening. So have the administrative services fee that we spoke about last month that's paid to the city, the debt service, which is, you know, a set amount, and then these project contributions. So you'll see the project contributions here are all projects that have signed funding agreements already, but we're projecting that we'll actually be paying for those in 2020, and then ending the year with that $2.2 million balance. Sales tax is volatile, so could go up or down, but we think our projection there is conservative. So, any specific questions on the budget? All right,
Doesn't
moving
sound
on
like it.
to the next page, the statement of activities. So this is just the monthly income statement, basically. And once again, this is both funds combined together. And we basically already went through this, just looking at what our sales tax was for the month and then paying the administrative expenses and the debt service. And that was the only activity for the month. You'll see that year-to-date actual sales tax number in that purple shading, and that ties to the next page where we have our more detailed sales tax analysis. So sales tax continued strong for the month of June, up 6.5%, and you can see the analysis there, so up 5% for the year. And, you know, we continue to look at that detail analysis every month by taxpayer, and we don't see unusual items. We see growth in some of our largest categories like retail and food service, so those are all good things. And our money continues to be invested in that EIC tax pool account where it's completely liquid. All right, so that's what I have for this portion, and I'm ready to turn it over to KEDC unless anyone else has questions before we do that.
Any questions before we move forward? Did this help?
This was great.
It's terrific.
better.
It's
Okay,
much
thank you.
clearer.
Good job with this.
Good job.
Thanks, so I really
Good job,
appreciate y'all's
Amy.
feedback too. Okay.
All right. Gil, I suppose that you're gonna make a presentation to us, so you have the floor.
Correct. Mr. Chair, members of the board. There it is. So Walt and I will be providing a presentation on our marketing efforts and our marketing plan, and ultimately the budget that's going to come down to the ask. Okay. All right. So we'll be covering five areas. It's going to be economic development with the wants and the needs as far as Kerrville, some of the meetings that we've been having in the past. And then we'll be looking at the roadmap that we've created internally. And then Walt's going to come in and start talking about some of the deliverables that we've had year to date, as well as the budget proposal. With that, if you'll recall, about now I'm officially 7 months in the job. My first 3 months was part of what I like to say the immersion tour. So I met with you all individually, not you all, not yet. And the goal was to meet with more than 200 community stakeholders to kind of, hear from them as far as the wants and the needs for Kerrville, and in addition to that, so they could kind of get to know who I am. And as a result of that, there were some areas that came up as far as, okay, what is it exactly that Kerrville is looking for? And one of them was that what I heard was a lot of stakeholders saying, well, we want growth in the community. However, we want selective economic growth. And there's a way to kind of work with that. Something else that came up was a lot of people were saying, well, we need more jobs. And I was like, needs a big word, knowing that we're at about right under 3% unemployment rate, which is one of the lowest rates in the state of Texas. Really what Kerrville is looking at is quality over quantity, so, quality jobs. And then the other thing that I heard across the board was, well, we moved here for a reason, so don't mess up what we have here, which is maintaining a certain quality of life, which I like to say is maintaining the fabric of the hill country. And then fiscal responsibility. That was also something that came up as part of my immersion tour. Then taking a step further and meeting with my board and at their leadership, they, basically we came down to what we're being asked to do is do more with less and don't disrupt the current lifestyle that we have, which is good. But now moving forward, we know what it is that we need to do in order to deliver in that regard. Now, I'm going to take a step back and looking at demographics, and this is a result of our interagency stakeholder retreat that we had last month. That was Andy Shapiro and Tracy McDaniel. They both said, okay, so your community, and part of our immersion tour is, we're not equipped to go after the big projects. I know we've got a shotgun approach or casting a wide net to go after whatever's out there. We just don't have the time or the resources for that. That being said, we also, and we learned this from Andy, who's on one of the leading site selectors in the country, he said, look, you all don't have the facilities yet or the adequate land. There's land, but it's not shovel ready according to what a site selector is looking for. So there's work to be done in that regard. And human capital, that was the one, and we all are very well aware of this, is that we're lacking the human capital, and to a certain extent, the available workforce is shrinking a bit momentarily. So now we know what it is that we need to be looking to do. And as a result of the stakeholder retreat, which was really just grabbing from all the different plans and coming up with our plan, is that 40 to 60 person operation, anything that's more than 100 jobs, or to be more specific, anything that's more than 300 jobs, we really are not equipped to go after that. The sweet spot for us is that 40 to 60 person operation. And if we're able to do one, maybe two of those deals per year, it'll fall in line with us having that incremental growth that we're looking for a community such as Kerrville, and then again, not disrupting that quality of life that we're looking to preserve. Now, I'm going to switch gears here and talk a little bit about the model of economic development. The traditional model, the model that I was trained in, and that has existed for about 30 years. You have to remember that economic development's only been around for about 30 years. It's still a very young career. It starts with marketing and promotion. It's heavy on the marketing and promotion side. I mean, that's what you do. You get your community out there, you sell to everybody and tell them, look at us, come and invest in our community. As a result, you'll end up having a pipeline of activity, specifically on the recruitment side, and you'll be looking at developing your lead generation engine internally. If you do that right, then you're going to have deals on the table. And that's where your executive director, your CEO, your community leadership now starts to come in to look to how we're going to close this deal, land this deal, and obviously incentives is going to be a part of that. Then you start looking at that. If you do that, then you're going to have groundbreakings, new companies coming into the area, and new jobs being created. In this case, what we would be looking at doing is primary jobs. And then in turn, once you do all of that, that leads to workforce growth. So now you'll start having people moving into your community, buying those houses in your community, shopping in your community, so on and so forth. They'll start, their kids will start attending the local school district. And that's how you start really growing a community by way of primary jobs. Again, this is a traditional model for economic development that's been used for the last 30 years, and again, the one that I was trained in. But we're Kerrville, right? We're a little bit different. This is a model that's been introduced thanks to Amazon HQ2 here in the last year and a half, almost 2 years. So you have a few communities that are starting to latch on, including some of the bigger metros. And it's called Inclusive Economic Development. And instead of looking at marketing and promotion as being your main driver behind creating jobs in the community, now you're looking at being the champion for your local business. Working with your local business, see where you need to bridge the gaps so they can expand and grow within your community. You have to remember that 80 to 85% of the growth of any particular community is usually from within. Then that's going to lead to quality of place. The EDO, Economic Development Organization, starts working with local leadership, community stakeholders, nonprofit organizations to start building a sense of place, not to be confused with quality of life. Quality of life is, for instance, in our case, it's the river, some of the eateries that we have and what have you. Quality of place is, of course, I can't take credit for this, right, but is that river trail. That river trail provides a connectivity for some of that young talent to get to some of these places because that's what they're looking for. That's what how they're thinking. So that's the difference between quality of place and quality of life. So you start looking at quality of place. When When you do that, then it starts to attract talent. Again, you know, there I use the word millennials. That's what millennials are looking for now. How is it that I can come into a community and help, you know, with a big picture, which is really contributing to, you know, for lack of a better description, saving the world, right? So it's that connectivity that I was talking about, that quality of place. When you have that time coming in, then you start recruiting the companies, or the companies will start coming to you, which is kind of like the coveted sector in economic development that we're looking for, which is those forward-thinking companies. You know, you start looking at information services, you know, high tech, a very specialized company in the medical health sector, aviation, aerospace, advanced manufacturing. Now we start looking at that 40 to 60 person operation range. So they are now starting to go into communities that have that talent, and that talent is gravitating towards communities that have quality of place. And when you've done all of this, now you start building a brand, or it starts to build on its own. This is a process. It's not going to be night and day. Once you have that brand, the power of a brand, or the difference between a brand and a marketing program, as previously stated, is when you're marketing, you're out there promoting and coming up ideas to develop a brand. The power of brand is you do all this, the brand gets created, and then other people start telling your story. And they start saying, you need to go see what Kerrville is doing because they got it. They have something very special there. That's the power of that brand. So as you can see, we've reverse engineered the model for economic development. And I like to say, I know Mark McDaniel and I were talking not too long ago, and I told him, look, this is kind of like what we're looking to do. And those in economic development, we know that this is the future for economic development. So we're kind of ahead of the curve. 5 to 10 years from now, this is going to be the model for recruiting companies. What excites me about this is that I'm in a position, or we're in a position now, to really start running with this and helping add to this model, create a certain case study that down the road could be used, you know, being one of those early adopters. Okay, now I'm going to come back to the action plans. There are several plans of action out there. We'll start with the 2050 Comprehensive Plan. That's a great plan. That's actually one of the reasons I ended up here. And the economic development section of it, it's got a blueprint for, okay, this is what the community wants. And then you look at the EDC and Chamber Business Plan, which was done by Avalanche Consulting about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And then my immersion tour, which was really just one-on-one visits, and a lot of what I was doing, I just wanted to learn from the community. And it's part of what I call my unscientific survey. And then the interagency stakeholder retreat, which we are looking to host on twice a year, so we're all on the same page. That was done by Tips Strategies last month. Most of you all were a part of that. And grabbing from that, we're able now to start aligning the different plans of action. And this was the result. And this, again, was with help from the leadership on my board, on the EDC board, is what we're calling the KEDC Business Ecosystem. I don't expect you all to read that. It's pretty fine print. So there's 7 lines of engagement, or 7 strategies for economic development. And each one of those, all of that information that's on there is information that was drawn from the different plans that came from this community, from you all. And I'm just going to use one as an example, which was the first one. That's business retention and expansion. Again, the action items, the community said very loud and clear, we want to expand our industrial footprint. We want shovel-ready sites. Focus on these target sectors. We need more on our inventory of buildings to land some of these manufacturers, advanced manufacturers, and then making sure that we have an economic development authority, specifically with economic research, which in this case would be the KEDC. The performance indicators was something that was also verbalized by this community through those different plans, and more through the 2050 plan. What we did, we just grabbed those and put them as part of the evaluation for this organization. So at the end of our fiscal year, you all, or a member of the community, can come back and say, okay, so this was your first line of engagement. How many companies did the KEDC visit this last year? What were the jobs that were associated with some of your visits? Not that there were we directly impacted that, but we supported the expansion of certain jobs. What was a payroll that was increased as a result of that, and then absorption rates. I mean, right now well, we have one building that's available, but it's pretty low. What do those look like? Again, this is information that came from the community saying, this is what we want, and this is how we're gonna evaluate the organization. What's in that box is what we came up with, which was, okay, here's the what, and here's, what they want delivered. Now it's the how. That's the real trick, right? So how are we gonna get that done? So we came up with different strategies, and for this first one is, basically a lot of relationship marketing, a lot of building relationships with the local industry. And we've started that process already, meeting with local companies, making sure that they have everything that they need from an economic perspective. And then on each one of those lines of strategy, we have a committee that we have created on a volunteer basis. Some of our board members, not all of them, will be involved. And in this case, it's an industry roundtable group. So we're in the process of launching a roundtable. I don't like to use the word committee, but it's a working group that's basically going to be the top 10, top 20 employers, the C-level executives, the plant managers of these entities will be meeting on a quarterly basis to start hearing from everybody. And once you start getting everybody together at the table, and that's really the power of an economic development organization, is the power to convene, the power to bring everybody together, especially when you have a prospect on the line. You start sharing information, and then you start to kind of fill in the gaps. Where do you need to help? I'm wrapping up here, by the way. So, switching gears now, coming back to the budget. What you've seen is kind of like our roadmap, and that leads into the budget. And the budget that you have here today has got a little bump from the previous year as far as an ask. But from our standpoint, and again, this is from the direction from our board, it's got minimal travel. I know that's something that came up in previous meetings. It's like, well, do you need to be going to certain places? Our travel is going to be really for professional development and for any prospect activity as it starts coming up. We're going to now look at concentrating on really developing that BRE program, or that local business aspect of our business. And then any lead generation or recruitment that we are going to have is going to be very specialized, very focused, coming back to that immersion tour when everybody said, well, we want selective growth. And Walt will be further flushing this topic out. We're going to be going after companies that have specific ties to the area. Anything outside of that, unless it comes to us, we're not going to have the time or the money to go after those companies. So it's going to be very, very select. And we have two examples that we can share at a later point that fall in that category. And then marketing. Before we go out there and start marketing Kerrville, we need to make sure that people in our community are also marketing, promoting, and selling Kerrville. So that's one thing that after, almost 7 months being here, the EDC has not done a good job or a decent job of telling its story or telling our story. So part of our marketing program now is going to be just really getting in front of a lot of people, different groups, not to sway them one way or another. It's just, here are the facts, here's our roadmap, our ecosystem, and here's what we're doing now to take the community to the next level, as we should be. Once we get through that, then we can start really promoting what we have, which is the Kerrville region. And again, it's an affordable, low-cost ask for what we're going to be doing. Keep in mind that, we know that we're being asked to do more with less. And the one increase that you'll see in there is basically the addition of a staffer. Very similar to what, at our board meeting, I'll say the same thing here. Our ask is we need another person on board. For a community size, we need a 2 to 3 person operation. I'm at a point where things could start falling through the cracks, and that drives me nuts. So we need somebody to start really coming in and helping us develop some of these programs, helping me and Walt to really start giving the EDC in this community what it needs and deserves. Okay, that concludes my part of the presentation. Any questions, or do you want to reserve until the end before Walt talks numbers and what have you?
I'd like to ask a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
Of course, you focus on business retention here, but my question, you were talking about the 40 to 60 employee groups that you're gonna target. Is that, you're gonna target those size of companies. What incentive packages are you going to offer them? Are you gonna use the matrix, but it's gonna be less than or more than in the matrix that we had in the past? Or we're gonna increase our incentives because we're gonna focus on such smaller companies? What are we gonna, how are we gonna manage the money that we're going to, are we gonna have an incentive program for those kinds of people? Because for me, in recruiting, it's like when you recruited when I was in corporation, you have to go find people to bring them here. We know right now we have to bring people here with the jobs. Those 40 to 60 companies have to bring their own employees. We don't have employees here. That's our biggest problem. And we're not gonna train employees unless there's a specific job. So they have to bring their own employees. Is there an incentive package for that? Is it been considered, discussed about how do you recruit companies? When you bring anyone here, they're gonna want to have some relocation assistance to get them here. Not just shovel-ready place, not just training and facilities and quality of life. Some of those things already exist, but they're gonna have some kind of incentive to get here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that. So as far as incentives, there's two ways to approach that. And first and foremost is, and again, because the model is changing in economic development, incentives or economic development organizations, they're getting attacked throughout the U.S. because of incentives. So what we need to do now is what we're looking at. Our model is grabbing that matrix and now looking at, okay, how can we create a program where if the company, knock on wood, were to pack up and leave, what are our clawbacks and what are we going to retain? And the best way to do that is you use your money, our money, to leverage what a state, in this case the state of Texas, or governor's office can use. So that's one example. The other one now is really you invest in your local workforce. So the first one is, okay, let's just say you build a facility, you have a shovel-ready site. You can take it a step further and say, okay, we can maybe build a facility, there's a 10, 15, maybe even 20-year agreement for the company to come in. If the company were to come in and leave after 5 years, will you have an asset in place that you can retain and market down the road? The other one is, and I've been a proponent of this in my previous jobs, is there's nothing wrong with there being an ask from the company. And I've seen this done with great success in other communities where, for instance, we need funds for infrastructure to develop housing. I'm not gonna say affordable housing, but housing for middle-class people like myself. Okay, so when we recruit a company and they have a certain X, capital investment, we say, okay, we can provide X amount of funds, but in return, if you've been here X amount of years and we provide the workforce for you, we need you to also provide funds into a special development fund that's gonna go into infrastructure, which in turn is gonna support your workforce. So those are ways to kind of think outside the box to minimize and leverage the funds that we're gonna be using. The other one is, again, just looking at, okay, so how is it that you can, again, just going back to asking those companies. There's nothing wrong with asking the company, can you provide certain funds to help us with your workforce? On workforce development, and I've seen this, I've done in the past is, okay, so we're not gonna provide funds to a particular company, cash incentives, but we're gonna develop a program and we're gonna use our funds to train your employees, and the employees could be trained in-house. And then the state of Texas Workforce Commissioner can come in and pitch in as well. If the company, again, knock on wood, if they were to pack up and leave, we've made an investment in our people. And another company is gonna come in and say, okay, there's a certain skill set there that they have invested in, and it basically becomes an asset. So those are two ways that we can look at it as far as now moving forward.
I don't agree with what you said. I think you have to incentivize companies to move. If you're gonna target a company, whether it's 10 employees, 20 employees, you have to give them some incentive to come here. That you can, to me, what you just said was a lot of smoke and mirrors. I couldn't follow it. You have to be more direct with a company about, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna give you this much assistance to get your people here because we want them to come here. Now, we have a problem with housing. We all know all that. And I don't know which comes first, the chicken or the egg, but I know one thing, if a company wants to come here, they have to have something that's gonna bring them here. They have no reason to move here.
Yeah.
And employees don't like to move. We know that.
Yeah.
So you have to attract them because they like the work that they're doing with the company that they're with, and you have to bring them here.
Yeah.
And we want to bring them here. When you're going high-tech companies, which is what you outlined a minute ago, that's the kind of jobs that we want here. There's no question about that. But we have to be ahead of the game. Your model, your second model of development, I think is accurate. You've got to be direct about who you want, and you have to go talk to them, and you have to offer them something. You can't say, well, if you'll give us something, we'll give you something. It's gotta be a lot more direct than that.
Okay, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So just to clear it, on the first one is being able to retain something. In this case, it would be a bricks and mortar facility. We incentivize the company by building a facility, we retain that asset. The other one is we incentivize a company by providing workforce training. They leave, we retain that asset, which is a skilled workforce here in the area. At the end of the day, I
I'm not
agree
worried
with
about
you.
them leaving, I'm worried about them coming.
No, and I
If you're talking
agree.
about them leaving, we're gonna have assets on the ground. I'm not worried about the assets at the back end. I'm
Yes.
worried about the
Yes,
the
sir.
jobs on the front end.
Yes, sir. But hold on. But at the end of the day, what we're looking at is we can't be naive about this. You are going to have to use incentives because the company's going to
Absolutely.
come in and say, "Well, I've got another community that's offering this." So
We all
if
know
it's,
that,
if
they
it's a
all
game,
offer the same.
yeah, they all offer the same.
We
So
have
if
to
it's,
offer something different.
if it's a game changer, then we do have to beef it up. And that's where the governor's office can come into play. The governor's office can say, okay, if we're in competition with a community outside of the state, they can be pretty aggressive as far as providing certain funds, and that's what a company wants to see. So I agree with what you're saying. At the end of the day, it boils down to money, which is the bottom line for the particular project.
It's always about money.
Correct.
So Bill, I have a question on you mentioned two different approaches for how you go after these companies, one being the traditional model and one being the inclusive model. Just taking as an example, if you identified a company that fit the profile, are you proposing that y'all will be using the inclusive model to try to attract that company here? Is that the approach?
It's the inclusive model, and if we get to a phase where we're negotiating and it's a project that we want, we're gonna have to go back and draw from the previous model, because that's what companies are used to right now.
Because it seems to me that under the inclusive model, you've got to have the employees first.
Correct.
They're the driver. And it just, I mean,
Have them.
I wonder how do you do that? How do you get employees here without jobs to then go get the
And-
jobs to hire the employees?
And that's where city manager and the mayor and we've got a working group that's been focusing in on housing development. And look, I mean, I've said this in the past, you know, I come from an area that was a tough sell, a very tough sell. Kerrville's not a tough sell. People actually want to move into this community. The problem is now, they can't afford to move into the area. You know, I haven't officially really moved in because housing prices are as such that, you know, I can't get here yet. That's at the root of, you know, as far, and economic development is the umbrella for all the above, right? At the end, that's where we're at right now, and we have some work to do in that regard.
Well, it seems to me that a combination of those two approaches would be really effective. If you can continue to build a community that people want to live in, that makes it an easy sell to the employees. And then if you attract businesses to then come through incentives, you've kind of met both of those.
It's,
What I would say is, if we look at how some of our major employers in the community are operating right now, take Peterson Health, for example. Take the state hospital, for example. The labor shed that we're drawing from is not Kerrville. The labor shed we're drawing from is as far away as San Antonio, it's Bernie, it's a lot of other areas. People, if you look at who's working at Peterson Health or Schreiner University, I'd say about half the professionals are in Kerrville, about half the professionals are from elsewhere, okay? Building the jobs here will draw people initially from the larger labor shed. What we'd like to see as part of our community values is people that work in Kerrville should live in Kerrville. So over time, as the labor force rises and as the availability of housing grows, more people will live in Kerrville. So the reality, I mean, State Hospital is gonna be adding 200 jobs this summer, 200 plus, maybe 300 as much. We've heard a number of numbers. Those are gonna come from somewhere. Okay, to say we have no labor here in Kerrville is a misnomer. We have labor in our labor shed to draw on, and that's what we propose doing. That's why the 50-person number is a good one, because finding 50 people in our large labor shed is not as big a challenge as finding 300 or 400 people, okay? Growing those businesses over time as we're able to develop our housing infrastructure and our educational opportunities and our workforce is certainly possible, feasible, and within that plan, moving toward that more inclusive model over time. You can't shift immediately, but
So how are you gonna get those people to move here if housing is not available and the cost of housing is too high? And they're in the labor shed, they're not gonna move here because they're gonna evaluate that.
sure.
They're gonna continue to commute.
Oh,
That's the
until we
other
can find
option
an
to
option,
them.
sure.
So there's no incentive that we're giving them to get them to live in Kerrville, if that's what you're trying to say you're gonna do.
Well, we're working, I think, with the task force, the mayor, to create more affordable housing options in Kerrville. That's one of the big barriers right now. We're working with the university and the schools to develop that workforce acumen and skill set that's necessary for our emerging needs. That's a piece of the equation, and all this will evolve.
That's more long-term.
All these will evolve over time. But you know, I think the big difference between this discussion this year and the discussion we had last year is we're far more focused in terms of what our target set looks like. And by the way, there's an intangible element of this thing that we're not discussing, and that is the company CEO or upper management has some tie to Kerrville or some desire to move here, okay? We have 4 opportunities right now in the pipeline. 2 of those have that as a strong element, okay? So that kind of supersedes or overcomes that pay me more here, otherwise I'll go there kind of argument set, which still exists obviously, but that's, you know, we have 2 companies that have a compelling reason to want to relocate to Kerrville, and by the way, they want to bring their business with them, okay? That's a target, that's a sweet spot target set that we're gonna be looking at. We already have 2 in the pipeline and we're not even really looking hard yet, okay? We have 2 other opportunities in the pipeline, which are manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. They have a reason to be in Kerrville that's above and beyond purely the incentive set that we're looking at, okay? So this is a different approach. I think it's a very focused approach which takes into account the needs and desires of the community based on a lot of work and a lot of studies and a lot of documentation, and one that I think we have a very, very strong chance of success for some strong chance for some near-term successes.
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
you're asking for a big increase from 180 to 250. And yet I thought I heard you saying it would go for an additional person, not into any program expansion or incentives or anything like that.
That's not correct, and I'll get into the budget items as to where specifically that money will be going. Obviously, that's not all for one individual headcount.
So you're gonna present the budget here in a second.
Absolutely.
All right.
Can I ask another question? I think your statement of the TIP strategy stakeholders meeting was, you know, really good from what Andy and the people there said. I don't think any of it is earth-shaking or new to say that we're not there to go after the big fish or large manufacturing, and that we've got these other issues that have been identified, most of them in 2050, and that our sweet spot is 40 to 60 jobs. I think that's all valid and true. What I'm having a hard time understanding is how do we get from point A to point B? How do we get some jobs? Because I don't think the housing's going to come first. That's too long term. I think jobs have got to come first. And whether it's 20 here, 40 here, whatever it is, I think that's what we have to focus on.
Totally agree. Absolutely. Maybe if I can go through some of the programs we're looking at to address that bridge gapping set of requirements, we can talk further about that.
Andy, for me, before I step to the side. All right.
Thank you, Gil.
Okay, 7 months ago, we were standing here, I guess about a year ago, we started these discussions. And I think it's important for us to be held accountable to what we said we would do. And so back then we talked about KDC 2.0 and a number of initiatives. And just for quick recap, this is kind of where we stand today versus what we said we'd do last year. We're 7 months into the fiscal year, so we still are working on some of these, but we've made some significant progress. Whoops. How do I do that? It takes it to the next one. Oh. Well, I'll talk you through it. We animated this. We obviously have recruited a great VP and COO. That was top on our priority list. At the same time, we've also expanded our board to include more stakeholders from the city and from the county. Just so you all know that our board of directors consists of all of our funding stakeholders, representatives, as well as community stakeholders who are non-funding, including the CVB and the ISD. And then we have some at-large members from the business community as well. We are working on re-engineering our processes and procedures. I think this gets to Don's question to some degree. We're re-looking at the matrix and the way that that works or doesn't work in the current situation. And we're looking, I think we're evolving the thinking towards a more flexible, project-specific approach to how we address the incentive requirements for the various opportunities we're looking at. We're currently in the process of working that with the city, and we expect to have that certainly done within the fiscal year as we had committed previously. We are working on some proactive marketing, particularly with respect to our web presence and our social media presence. This is one of the ways that we're going to more cost effectively, and I think more effectively generally, get the word out to the marketplace as far as what our capabilities are and what our desires are. We are working also with our property database and our site selector capacity. I'd say in the last 6 months or so, we've had more site selectors in town and had more site selector contacts than we probably had in the last decade or so. So we're really getting active with that important group of people. They are beginning to really understand what Kerrville looks like, and they're really beginning to understand how Kerrville operates. I'll also say with respect to the brand building activity that Gil mentioned earlier, that is already working. If you talk to the Hobby Lobby guys who are working with us on that very important project, they're becoming strong advocates for Kerrville. They're out there helping us to sell the Kerrville story. They're from North Carolina. They do a lot of commercial development, and particularly in the retail space, and they are big, big fans of Kerrville. We want to continue to grow that group of satisfied clients, if you will, to help us build our brand as not only a great place to do business, but also a great community to do business with. We have a game plan for trade show participation. It's going to be quite limited due to our limited ask this year. And we are going to continue to work with our site selectors, leveraging successes, as I mentioned before. Our budget, you have received copies of it before. We are asking for more. I recall in our discussions last year, concerns were raised about giving us a pistol but not any bullets. I said give us a year to get ourselves together in terms of personnel and strategy, and we'll come back and ask for more, which is what we're doing this year. I will say with respect to the numbers you see, this has been a very highly iterative process with our board. I thank our board for the great amount of time that they've all dedicated and invested in us to come up with this plan. I will say that the numbers you see are considerably less than our initial ask. That's not unusual. But I think as well, this process has allowed us to hone a very specific and very focused set of activities, as was described in the 7 lines of effort that we've defined for ourselves, all of which are tied to specific items in the various plans that we've worked with specific actions and specific accountability points tied to specific elements of this budget. If we look generally and categorically, these are the numbers and how they look, and a high level of what these types of investments will result in. Business recruitment, we are looking at doing a couple of focused corporate recruitment missions. We would look at bringing and finding C-level executives with ties to Kerrville. There's ways to define and address that market through market research, and this will be part of that investment to achieve that outcome. In terms of marketing and design, we're going to continue to update our website and develop better collateral material, and we're going to do our local marketing program. This also includes, by the way, the semi-annual meetings that we'll be having with the key stakeholders.
What's a C-level executive?
CEO, CFO, COO. Training. Obviously, we want to continue to invest in our staff. And the staff adjustment, by the way, would be the addition of, or actually the return of Teresa Metcalf to the organization. For those of you who weren't around during the rather turbulent last couple of years, Teresa was part of the EDC team. She moved over to support the chamber exclusively, and now it's her desire, both from a career standpoint, but also our need in terms of her skill set, to have her return on a full-time basis to the EDC organization to lead the business retention expansion effort, which is a key element of our overall project plan. We got outside contract services. These are impact analysis and other consultants of this type. This is to support the business cases that we will present to you all in the coming year for your approval. That return on investment analysis is something that has been valued by the EIC and the city as an important element of the decision-making process, and we'll continue to do that. We will be attending some conferences, both in Texas and national, on a very limited basis, but it's important for us to be able to leverage our presence in those forums in order to both lead generate and also to develop important networking associations with key decision makers. One of the things I didn't mention as a big progress point that we've made, actually since Gil has come on board, is that we're clearly and soundly on the map where Austin is concerned. We got great contacts with the Economic Development Corporation of Texas, as well as the Workforce Commission. They are sources of funding and incentives, particularly for those opportunities coming from out of state, and those relationships are very valuable. Reinforcing those relationships through the TEDC conference participation is an important aspect. We got very limited travel. It's not that much more than we spent this year. This is to visit primarily prospects. We have, as I said before, 4 key prospects right now in the pipeline. Aggregate of all those is somewhere on the order of 400, 300, between 300 and 400 primary jobs. And we will likely be visiting those folks certainly within the next fiscal year, probably in the near term. There is one event that we will be attending. It's the Site Selectors Guild. That's a very, very selective group. Very hard to get into that. And because of our exposure with Andy Shapiro, he's agreed to allow us to come up. It'll probably be Gil alone to go up and meet some of the key site selectors. It's a very cost-effective and easy way for us to get our story in front of that important group. And so that's really where we're at. There is some enhancement of the programs in the areas that I talked about. There is the movement of 1 personnel to establish a full-time position. The budget as constructed also assumes a constant, non-increasing support level on the part of the Chamber of Commerce, which includes paying for essentially 1 day a week of my time, which I can tell you over the last year has been far more than that. EDC has gotten substantial advantage in terms of that arrangement. It'll also include bookkeeping services, reception, and others. And under this agreement, the Chamber will continue to waive rents for the EDC offices in the Chamber building. So that's where we're at. In summary, all we're asking for is another person and some bullets in our gun so that we can go out and do some proactive work, and also a few bullets so that we can continue to keep you all as our stakeholders and our community at large involved and informed in this important set of processes. As I said before, we got 4 real bona fide no kidding opportunities in the pipeline right now. We're continuing to support the city's efforts to develop affordable housing options. We're continuing to support the city's efforts to bring quality, gap-filling retail to our area. We're continuing to support the city's efforts to bring hospitality opportunities and options to our area. And we respectfully request your support for our budget ask.
Could you go back to the detail that you showed?
Sure.
Thank you.
Gil's got the handout of the roadmap.
Well, we haven't seen this before. Stop for DWI, this is the first test they'll give you.
Read this.
Well, where do y'all stand with the other funders?
You're the first people we are addressing. That's, I think, per tradition. You all are the largest and therefore the first. And the timing works this way. The fact that we have key stakeholders on the board who represent those organizations, and they were fundamental to the development of this budget and are in concurrence in a unanimous fashion with the budget, we're pretty confident we're going to be able to get those numbers.
Just from my perspective as your representative that sits on the KEDC board, I think either Gil or Walt initially said that this was not the very first iteration of this budget. It's come to us a couple of times and many revisions made. But I think most of what we talked about after our I can't remember the name of it, where all of us were in the meeting and the site selectors were here giving us their
Stakeholder retreat, yeah.
the stakeholder retreat, was that we're not quite ready to be going all over the United States looking for that primary 250 to 500 job opportunity. We would, in my opinion, right now, be sending good money, chasing probably very little opportunity. And so we, as a board, have pared that down, and I really like the direction that we're taking. Now, it doesn't mean we won't get there, but, you know, sometimes you gotta crawl before you walk. And so that's somewhat, in my opinion, the direction. Where the increases are equally, as percentage goes, to the percentage that all of the financial stakeholders had in the past. I think that math works out
Roughly. Yeah.
roughly that same.
Predicate on your expense line, though, the biggest increase is the payroll of $100 grand.
Right,
Correct.
right.
That's your additional person? Or is that, does that also include the chamber number? Is that everything in that number? What's in that $100 grand?
31 to 214.
Yeah, 131 to 214.
82,000.
About 82. We're looking at a market tested benchmarked number for the BRE person in Teresa. That number has been shared with our board of directors and they've concurred on that. And the balance of that is for potential pay treatments for the CEO based on performance matrix that is being defined for his performance in the following fiscal year. Also agreed to by our board of directors.
I guess my concern is I don't see any program money. At least in the increase that you're asking from us, and I'm not clear on what say, the next 6 months, what the goals are gonna be in terms of actual accomplishments on creating new jobs.
I think what they're doing, what I see in that is that they're increasing the person, Teresa will be their
Their
business-
BRE.
BRE
yeah.
person.
Yeah,
And
I
that's the
understand
program.
that.
That's the program, is to really work with local businesses to incrementally increase their staff and their business.
So really just do it on existing
More local,
businesses and
more
not any
directly
kind of
local money.
Now,
attraction.
No,
let me
not
just say
true?
this, you know, we've got 4 opportunities in our pipeline, and I think those of us who've worked in economic development understand the amount of work it takes to bring one of those in. We're working 4 right now. We anticipate there to be more. So we have, unlike last year, or perhaps even the previous year, where I didn't see any opportunities at all in the pipeline. We have 4 bona fide, no kidding, primary job creators that fit our profile to one degree or another. 2 fit it pretty perfectly. That we're gonna be working pretty hard over the next 6 months. That's the fact, okay? That's a lot of work. All of them are coming from out of state. Therefore, there's a Texas element to that that we can leverage in terms of incentives. That means a lot of trips to Austin to make that happen. That's gonna take a lot of time over the next 6 months. We anticipate the pipeline will grow. Though our marketing efforts and our marketing money is rather limited, we anticipate that through a lot of good relationship marketing, through reputation growth, through the existing companies we're working with, and others, we will see other opportunities fall into that pipeline. But I would say, in my relatively short time here in Kerrville, I've not seen anywhere near this level of potential coming out of the EDC in terms of job production within the near to medium term. And that's where our focus is really going to be in terms of riding those horses home and trying to get some more in the pipeline.
Right, and part of the strategy there is to identify business owners that potentially want to move here with those smaller companies.
Well, we have one company, and I can be a little bit circumspect about this, but one company from the south, manufacturing company. They view a high level of demand for themselves in the local area. It's a logistically challenging product to move, and they see advantages of setting up manufacturing in the hill country to accommodate that product need, okay? That gives us a unique discriminator because of the market being here and the fact that we're willing to work with them to set up a factory here. Will they come and ask for some incentives? Sure. But then we're not leading with the incentives because they've already come to us asking for help and information on how to come here. That's a sweet spot opportunity for us. Another one is a family operation from the north, Advanced Manufacturing and Assembly. They're looking to relocate to Kerrville because they own property here, they have history here, they have family here, and they want to come home. That's a different way that we leverage our position uniquely and effectively. Will they ask for incentives? Sure they will. But they're not leading with the request for incentives. Those are the kind of opportunities we're seeking.
How are they addressing the employment problem, the employment issue?
Well,
Manufacturing jobs.
A couple things. Our labor shed's relatively large. In the case of both manufacturing operations, the skill levels required are not super technical or very high. And we believe that we can draw upon the labor shed as far as Bernie and other places to get people to commute in at first to fulfill these needs. We already see that demonstrated in other businesses. That's how companies are operating now. And as we develop our bandwidth with respect to affordable housing, we will hope that and work to get those folks to move here. But you want a chicken, it's got to be the jobs. This is a way that we can get that job. And those of us who've lived in metro areas, a 30, 40, 50-minute commute each way to work is not impossible. In fact, it's typical for many. So I don't view if we don't have the jobs in Kerrville, we're sunk argument as being valid. I view we got to recruit, we got to help, we got to get assistance to these companies to get access to retired military out of our military bases. We got to leverage our graduates out of Ivy High School. We got to do everything we can in order to overcome, the very shallow labor pool we have. But, that's why to get 50 jobs, I mean, if you took just the flux of employees at Mooney, for example, the pluses and minuses you see there in terms of surges and retractions over a relatively short amount of time, you know, that's 50 people. So it's doable. It's very doable.
Here, I'll add real quick, there was a couple of comments or questions. It's a little bit more, and trust me, if there was more money, I mean, I'll use it, but we're not in a position right now. The bump and the increase again is for visitor retention expansion to start working our program from within. Other programs, we don't have the workforce yet to recruit other companies. The recruitment that we will be doing will be very selective for that particular group within our target sectors. The projects that we do have, I mean, I will say it's been more because of reactive economic development. And there's a lot of work in that regard too, as opposed to proactive. We haven't even started, you know, our lead generation engine yet. It's been more on the reactive side and making sure that, you know, we give them what they need so we're still in the game. And 3 of those 4 projects are within that category that could absorb some of the capacity that we have. One is much larger, which is kind of a stretch. So we're not in a position to be proactive yet because we just don't have the human capital for it. And again, and then I'll use the state hospital, for instance. I mean, they're going to be adding 250 employees. We're already working with them to start looking at how we can develop some of those workforce training programs using funds through the state, and they're going to be busing people into our community, and that hurts me, right? That's like, well, that's why we're here, to make sure that money stays in our community and not just 9 to 5. So we have to do a little bit of, for lack of a better description, a little bit of housekeeping to accommodate what we have right now, how we're going to be growing our workforce, keeping in our quality of life direction that we've been asked to take, in order to take the next step, which could potentially be 6 months to a year from now, to really start being proactive. Does that kind of, you see where I'm coming from? Yes? We need to do some housekeeping before we can actually start going out there and promoting.
Well, we have to understand what our strengths and weaknesses are and leverage our strengths too. And labor shortage and shallow labor pool is a challenge, but it's not an insurmountable one by any stretch. It's one we need to manage and work and develop, but that's not an overnight issue either.
In addition to the efforts that you were just talking about with the state hospital, what other efforts do y'all have on the table to encourage local businesses and to help them grow?
Right now, it's more of, we haven't gotten to developing those programs yet. It's part of this ecosystem that we've created, because right now it's more of just stopping the bleeding. I mean, we've got 4 or 5 different companies, and by year's end, I think the number that we have is about 700 employees that they're going to be adding. And that's just in some of the local regional businesses that we have. So right now, and that's where the ask for that BRE position comes into play, to come in and really help us develop that.
Yeah, if you look at Hobby Lobby, you look at the hotel coming in, you look at obviously the hospital. Peterson always is hiring. They've probably got a gap perpetually of 50 to 75 jobs alone. VA hospital as well. I mean, we could put our finger on about 500 jobs that are going to come into our community in the next 9 months, and that's a challenge. But I will say, with respect to the development of small business, over the last year, Chamber has been very, very involved in developing some incubation capability and capacity for our small businesses. We've set up a SCORE mentorship program, so our small businesses are getting mentored. We have a dozen of those businesses now receiving, a dozen or more businesses receiving mentorship. We've upped our education greatly in terms of basic business education, advanced business education in the Chamber. And we're very, very close to rolling out a set of access to finance options with respect to working with SBA programs and others to get some access to finance going. So on the Chamber side, we have been promoting some of the, I guess, expansion of the or startups, and that will obviously continue as a priority effort on the Chamber side.
So I'll leave you with this, if there's some other questions. I think most of you all, and maybe the new ones do not have my number, but I'm most definitely available to meet with you all one-on-one or small groups to just kind of go over the ecosystem. Would really look at doing that here in the next week, couple of weeks, to further flesh this topic out and see what else it is that you all are looking at and how we can accommodate for that.
Gil, is that new model too new to see how it's played out in other communities, the inclusive model compared to the traditional model?
I won't say too new. That's, everything indicates that that's where economic development is headed right now. And you already have some communities really looking at doing that. And again, I'll go back to Amazon HQ2. It just turned everything upside down as far as your traditional way of doing economic development. And that's not going away. You've got other companies now starting to do that as well. And the more we start looking at that too, how companies are now also making site selection public, which is unheard of in economic development, but we just have to be nimble and be able to adapt to that. So I would prefer to really look at that, or using a combination of the two. As Mr. Barnett said, is like, well, at the end of the day, we are going to have to use funds to incentivize and recruit these companies, absolutely. But how do we now look at making sure we retain, the best, our assets, which is human capital and infrastructure.
Any other questions? Again, as your board representative of KEDC, I'm in support of the budget. Just want to get that on the record.
Thank you.
All right. So,
We have one speaker that wants to speak for the, as to the budget.
which one?
Yours.
Okay.
ESC's, yes.
So, with KEDC's request, there's a funding agreement that goes with that. You guys kind of know what the process is there. So, we would be looking, we can either have further discussion on the ask in executive session, move to have staff prepare a funding agreement. Those are the options associated with that. So,
You want to talk?
Can I speak on this one? I mean, it's all the same, you said. Can I just speak now before you disappear on the KDC?
that's fine.
George Brewery, 1616 Glen Road. Had a lot of stuff to say, but I can't read that stuff, so what's the total expense?
400,000.
How much?
400.
Okay, that's just curiosity. More than anything, I just wanted to commend Gil on his presentation, and one of the things he talked about, which is the support for the investing in your current workforce. I would encourage you to keep doing that. If you paid attention to the news recently, you saw the James Avery, deal in Cedar Park, and that's a company that's here, and they were asked at their EDC meeting in Cedar Park, would that be taking jobs away from Kerrville? And they said, well, that's not the intent, but they said they had two problems with bringing jobs here or keeping jobs here, those types of jobs. And keep in mind the jobs they were taking are exactly in what we're targeting, which is it's 100 jobs ultimately, but they're high-tech jobs. They're $75,000 a year annual salaries is what they're taking over there. And they said the two reasons were not that they were having difficulty in Kerrville was not housing, not lack of amenities, but first and foremost was the talent pool. So it's not skilled labor to fit the jobs that they were looking for, which if you're investing in those people in a training program, then that would help. The other was kind of one I never really thought about, which is they were suggesting that if I'm, say, going to recruit, say, Mr. Early to come work in my company, coming to Kerrville, you're going to move your family, your spouse is coming with you, and Kerrville isn't offering other jobs to satisfy your spouse's needs. So it gets down to not amenities, not housing as much as just jobs, good jobs. So the more good jobs you can bring, the better off you end up being. So it's a long-term solution, but if you don't start, at some point you're never going to get there with investing in the current workforce. So if you do anything else, I would say, don't discourage that aspect of what he presented and more encourage it. It would go a long ways to supporting the community. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brody.
Well, I think what George is referring to is a program. This is an operating budget, is what this is. This is your operating, your people doing your job, is what this is about. A program is a totally different aspect, a training program, which the state does a lot of that, or will give you some of that work, if it's set up properly. Fox Tank came here, we did that. We set up a training program out there for welders. No one ever went. They end up training them all in their facility. But they were incentivized to do that.
I'm pretty impressed with the, you know, the new approach, and I think Gil's done a good job kind of explaining. You know, certainly the old method hasn't completely disappeared, but the new method is certainly, it makes a lot of sense to me that that's how we get ahead, and we gotta create our brand. And there's a lot of things here I think we're not spending very much money on, but we are spending on more on another person, and but that's all directed toward doing something internally. I think it's worth a good try to see how that works. So I guess
I agree. I think that you need people to do the work, and you've got to have someone like Teresa in that role. Someone's got to be dedicated to business retention and development. But we don't see this as what it doesn't translate is what's the real impact, and it's going to be a softer impact over time. But that's the way things are. Jobs don't really grow incrementally. 40 jobs, 50 jobs, 200 jobs. Those are really home runs. This is just getting a bunt down. Get the bunt down and get on base.
hitting singles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of the budget. I'll make a motion to accept the budget. If we're going to deal with this separately, or
Well, so the first motion would be to have a funding agreement drawn up
okay,
to
I'll
fund
make that motion.
KEDC's.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yeah, just so, because I've not seen one before, what does a funding agreement entail? Is it simply just an approval of an amount, or are there benchmarks, or are there?
I think EA could speak to that
Let me
for
provide
us.
a little bit of clarity to that. So last year or really this fiscal year that we're in right now, was year 3 of a 3-year agreement that the EIC had with KDC in regards to the continued provision of their services for the outline of programs, similar to what you saw right now. It had a little bit different work program. They'd come in every year, they'd provide an update to their work program and kind of what they were doing for the upcoming year. Now, obviously that was applicable for each budget year's appropriation, but it was a 3-year agreement. I believe what is being contemplated for this year is a 1-year funding agreement that would be for the amount that they have provided for here. There'll be backup provisions to that. It'd be very similar to what you see in regards to the other funding agreements that we have with other entities, for economic development purposes. This one has very specific provision of services. We would also, obviously, if you approve the budget today, we'll be bringing your administrative services contract you have with the city. We would anticipate probably both of those next month.
So I agree that, Gil and Walt have done a good job. And it seems to me like the KDC is kind of at the beginning of a new era where you're really going to get to load your gun and get to go out there and take your best shot. But to me, I think what's important for both EIC and the community is how is success going to be measured? And I'd like to see something in the funding agreement that, that speaks to that a little bit, whether it's, reporting back on some metrics, or has that historically been done or not?
It's been established what those are.
We're
But-
not concerned about that. I mean, we would support accountability to our funding.
I mean, it seems like with the roadmap that you've got, that you could report back on how you're progressing through that roadmap, and that's part of the deliverables that, both hold you guys accountable and give us a sense of what's the return on investment?
One of the things that I've tried to do since I took over last August as executive director is to increase the level of transparency and communication with all our stakeholders. I think think we've made great progress in that regard. We didn't used to actually give monthly presentations at the EDC meetings as a small example, but I think an important one. We are far more accessible. We have a bigger board now in terms of participation from the city and from the county. So that transparency is there. We need to talk to the other stakeholders. We want to continue with that transparency, and we're not afraid at all of being held accountable to results. I mean, that's normal for us, and by all means, we encourage that.
So Walt, would it be feasible for KEDC to give us some measurables that we could put into the funding agreement before the funding agreement's drawn and let us agree to that?
Off of our 7 lines of effort that we've defined, the metrics are included in that. We would probably, I think, with your agreement, capture a significant subset of those, and we'd be happy to have that as part of our ongoing accountability set.
And we could.
But that's one of the reasons we have those included in the overall plan, because we need to measure our progress as well amongst ourselves.
So EA could Walt and Gil provide that, and then that be distributed to us so that we actually see it in the funding agreement.
Sure.
And would that be
Yeah.
something you want to see?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Any other discussion? Questions? So we do have a motion and a second for to ask the staff to create a funding agreement for the $250,000 ask of the EIC for the KEDC's proposed fiscal year 1920 budget. All those in favor show by raising your right hand. And that passes unanimously. All right, let's move on back to item 4A, which is the proposed Economic Improvement Corporation budget. EA, you had mentioned our services agreement. It is incorporated in the original budget. What is our timing on approval of that budget?
We would anticipate being able to bring that back to you probably next month. We don't expect a significant redraft of that. Pretty basic service levels that we provide for you every year. So we can get that redrafted to you and back next month if that's your desire.
Okay. And do we do that before we approve the budget, or do we approve the budget
You approve the
today?
budget today, yes, sir, and then we'll be bringing that as a component unit fund to the city council and their review of the overall budgets that they approve in the August-September timeframe. So the agreements that we bring back to you obviously will have those same fiscal numbers.
Very good. So I would entertain a motion to approve the budget that was drafted and presented.
I'll move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on the budget for our Economic Improvement Corporation? All those in favor signal by raising your right hand. That passes unanimously as well. All right. One more item in item number 4, which is 4C, which is the appointment of a subcommittee of EIC members to review potential bylaw changes. EA, I think you passed something out to us. You want to kind of give us an idea of
Yes, sir.
what we have?
I did. I just printed out a copy of the bylaws, essentially that had been drafted back in the creation documents of the corporation in the mid-90s, and then several of the amendments that have occurred since then. This body had provided some feedback to us some months ago that you all may want to take a look at making some modifications potentially to the bylaws, and so you'd asked on a future agenda to put an item for you all to further discuss. If it's your desire, we'll need to come back with an actual resolution that would enact that subcommittee, but we really just put this on the agenda so you all have the opportunity to discuss it.
Is that subcommittee limited to members of this board, or can they go outside the board?
I guess it could. We anticipated there would be a subcommittee of this board, and then certainly staff will provide liaison support services to you.
So is that a desirable thing? I know we had them put it on the agenda, so in last month's meeting, we must have had a desire to review those.
So something,
I mean, they do have some some things that were relevant to the time that the bylaws were written. I read them several times. That could be cleaned up and if we wanna, put together a committee to study that and maybe do the cleanup or ask additional questions and get us to where we make a presentation of changes, I'm all for that. So if you would like to serve on that,
No.
just raise your hand.
I'll read the red lines, but I don't wanna do the rest of it.
I mean, I would do it.
Kent will serve.
Kent will do it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
For the initiation?
Yeah,
Part
I'd
of
be
the
hap-
initiation.
I'd be happy to help, depending on when, we could discuss when we meet and those kinds of things separately, but I'd be happy to help serve.
And I don't mind serving again on that. So, 3?
I'll throw in.
All right, 4.
Is it a problem if we have 4, if it becomes a quorum?
No, it's, it'll be subject to the Open Meetings Act either way, so.
Okay, so did we get note of the 4 that have agreed to serve? Very good. Does that need to be voted on?
Yeah, so again, what we'll do is we'll take this feedback for you now that we know that you actually wanna do it, and that you want 4 members to be on it, and so we'll bring a resolution back to you next meeting, and that will actually go ahead and stand up to the subcommittee.
Okay, very good.
Give it-
So no more action today then?
That's correct.
With regard to
We've
that.
got the direction we need.
We do need to move to executive session. We have some updates on, regarding economic development negotiations, section 551087. If someone would make that motion.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second.
Second.
All those in favor, raise your right hand. We are moving into executive session. It's 5:32. So we're back into regular session. It's 5:50. There is no action or items for discussion that came from the executive session. And so we'll move on to item number 7, items for future agendas. Anyone have anything to add? Anyone have any announcements? If not, we are adjourned. It is 5:51.